Hi team and welcome. Reuben here from Link Academy, and in this session we're talking zero bank reconciliation. More specifically, the scenario where we accidentally overpay a supplier and we leave ourselves in credit with that supplier to offset any future invoices. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So to reconcile our supplier overpayment, we want to first click on the Reconcile button within our the bank account that we've paid the supplier out of. So if we scroll down here, there's one I prepared earlier. We find the entry that represents the payment we made to that supplier. Excellent. So here it is here, Gateway Motors, payment $500. And if we click Find and Match, we want to firstly find the invoice, the accounts payable invoice that was meant to have been for. So we should have paid, here it is here, we should have paid them $411.35, but for whatever reason, we paid them $500, all right? So whether that was error or oversight, that's what we first want to do. Find the invoice it was meant for and tick that invoice. It's going to match $411.35 up with that $500. Great. Now this is the tricky bit, so watch closely. Under new transaction, because we have $88.65 we need to account for still, so under new transaction you want to click spend money. And this will take you to this page here. So, and step 2 of that is where it says spent as, you want to mark this as overpayment. So overpayment. Great, and it's going to create an overpayment transactions for Gateway Motors on that same date. And in the description you can just type in something like overpayment due to error or something to that effect. We'll just leave it as overpayment. You'll notice it picks up the exact difference, puts that to the accounts payable account, which is very important because we are in credit with the supplier due to this overpayment. There's no GST on this because this is not a good or a service. It's not a prepayment, it is an overpayment. A real common question I get is, how do I know whether I should be doing a prepayment or an overpayment? A prepayment is deliberate. It's something we're paying in advance before we receive an invoice for a reason in exchange for some services or products. An overpayment is most of the time is accidental. We don't, for whatever reason, we're paying more than the value of the invoice that we are intending to. So that's not a good or a service. That GST will be on the new services we receive that this gets offset against. Okay, so we'll enter in our region. You might not have that column, but if you don't, don't worry. We'll click Save. And so what we have achieved there is we have closed out the original accounts payable that we intended to pay, and we've created a supplier credit essentially, or an overpayment inside our accounts payable for the difference. Okay, so then we're able to reconcile our $500. So that's how we reconcile a supplier overpayment. So what I'm going to show you next is 2 methods of allocating that supplier overpayment to an existing supplier invoice. So in scenario number 1, our supplier sends us a fresh invoice for some new services or new product that we've incurred from them, and we want to take our overpayment and match it up to that new invoice so we can pay them the correct amount. And here's how we do it. So under accounts and purchases, we go through this scenario. I've just received a new supplier invoice. I'm going to click new and bill, and I'm going to fill out a invoice just like I always would. So this one, our overpayment was for Gateway Motors. We'll imagine that was the invoice date, and it'll be a new services or new product, new motor services. Great. One, and it was $500. We'll put that to motor vehicles. Great, we'll put that to north. Something to that effect, right? Now we can still save and send for approval and do all the things we could normally do when creating a supplier invoice, but I'm going to jump straight to approve, like so. Fantastic. Now, because we have an overpayment already matched on this supplier, Xero's prompting me now to say, hey, you've got a new invoice. Are you aware that there is an existing credit for this invoice? And it's saying, do you want to allocate this? And if you click allocate, you can choose how much of that credit you want to allocate to this particular invoice, like so. So that is method number 1. And that's going to reduce the value of my new invoice by $88.65, and it's going to close out my overpayment or my supplier credit by the same value. So I'm not going to do this. I'm going to click cancel, and we'll get into method number 2. So that's probably the quickest and more realistic method. The next invoice you get, you just allocate that overpayment to that. We can do the same thing manually though, by going to accounts and purchases. This is method number 2 of allocating a supplier overpayment. when we click awaiting payment and view all of our invoices, supplier invoices, and we click into our overpayment here, Gateway Motors, $88.65, so it's still floating around, yet to be allocated. If we click into that now, under overpayment options in the top right, you can choose allocate credit, and this is the same thing. It's just manually we get it going there a different way, and we're manually allocating which invoice we're applying this credit to. So here we're applying $88.65 to this open invoice. It's the same effect. Fantastic. So those are the two methods of allocating a supplier overpayment. So what we covered in that session was how to reconcile a supplier overpayment in your Xero. We first found the overpayment, the value that was overpaid, and matched that to the correct invoice. We then created a new transaction and made sure that was marked as an overpayment, and then completed that transaction to reconcile that line. What we then did was go through two different methods of allocating that overpayment, either on a new invoice as we entered it, or manually by finding that overpayment and manually allocating it to an open supplier invoice. Hopefully you found that worthwhile, and I'll see you in the next session.